So with that, we will move on to England, which is a bit more doom and gloom, admittedly.
It's not doom and gloom.
No, it's not.
Not for me.
No, it's not. In terms of their own immediate knee-jerk reaction, you have Eddie Jones coming under fire about his job security. You have guys like I told you having to come out and support him in the media. You have the Sarries thing coming under fire. You have all kinds of the usual kind of cocktail of kind of very, very negative kind of things.
Some
that
of which
come
Eddie
with
Jones
losses.
has put on himself.
Oh well, Eddie Jones invites it with the way he combats the media anyway, which can be good. It's good for spectacle.
And the stubbornness of selection. I mean, you can't convince me that Mark Wilson over Sam Simmons as a back row option makes any sense. It doesn't. That English back row would be so much better with Curry at 6, Ben Earl at 7. Billy V at 8, that's fine, and then Sam Simmons to come on off the bench.
Or just put Sam Simmons at 6 or something like that.
Sure, but potentially transformative right there, I think. And Curry is a 6, and Ben Earl is a great 7, so why not have those two do that, and then Billy V and Simmons shoot it out for 8, one on the bench, one starting. Yeah. It would just be better, and Wilson was the one back rower in that team coming up with losing plays.
Yeah, negative plays, very much so. Yeah, he was noticeable in that Ireland showing for missing tackles and misreads and stuff.
Yeah, he's not a bad player. He's a great player in many respects, but it just at test level found out a little bit.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I just think selection-wise, Eddie Jones hasn't got everything right. But I think their story of the tournament is they were champions of the Six Nations. Then they had played a very curious Autumn Nations Cup where they kicked literally everything from inside their own maybe 65 meters, anything, even maybe 70 meters, anything in that zone. They were just kicking everything and defending and working on their defense, and it was enough against teams that weren't playing with enough in offense to counter them. But they rode their luck, and they were lucky to win that Autumn Nations Cup final against a derailed France, and it probably papered over some cracks, and then they started against Scotland playing that exact same way,
and the cracks kind of showed very quickly, and they were found out. Their kicking game, for all that they'd been kicking, wasn't as sharp as Scotland's kicking game, and then when their backs were to the wall and they were fishing for a try and having to move the ball, they looked very sloppy and very sluggish at that point. And then from there, that really it sets up the Six Nations in a bad light. When you open with a loss to Scotland, it's obviously not going to be as good a year as last year. But they did, their hand was a bit forced to play a bit more ball, and they did in patches. They were not as clinical as Wales. By the time the Wales game came around, they did put together 2 lovely tries that were glimpses into how they can play, but not enough, and Wales were too sharp and too clinical for them, and they were again a little dialed out, a little short on discipline. The Sarries guys, while having full quality, weren't quite starting at the pitch of all the other teams, and were as a result a little bit sloppy. You had Itoje racking up his big penalty count in that particular game, which, as you say, was down to trying to make play. He was still one of the ones who looked fit and trying to make plays, just not quite match sharp, and therefore the plays were penalties instead of actually being turnovers. But he grew into the game, and they all grew into the tournament, and they all kind of grew into the tournament leading to that France game, which was their highlight of the whole showing, the whole campaign. It was a beautiful performance against a very, very good and very game French team. Just a lovely game of rugby from a neutral point of view.
And it's a great one to win. So hard to break down that defence, but they did it, and they did it really well, and then they deserved the win, and it was rightly Itoje who comes up with the winning play. Much of what they did was brilliant, but I felt they were playing catch up from that week one. They were a little shocked by a Scotland team that were so game, and I think Eddie Jones was probably a little shocked by just how the tournament went generally, in terms of it was very, very different from the Autumn Nations Cup and then even last year's Six Nations, in that there was so much more offensive footy going on. And then even in that last game against Ireland, where I'm sure he was hoping to play out that same game again, Ireland come with way more, and they play with way more pace, and they play with way more offensive, they're moving the point of contact, they're attacking, and I think England at their best are better at that than anybody. Their offense is like a well-oiled machine with crisp passing and beautiful misdirection. And
it had been, but it wasn't oiled in a while. It wasn't oiled all during the Autumn Nations, and therefore it came in a little rusty, and there was a little squeak on it, and it wasn't quite right. And they needed to apply some WD-40 to that offense, probably to get it moving a little bit earlier in the tournament. But and the other factor, the huge factor, is that there is still a Manu Tuilagi shaped hole in their midfield that is going to negatively affect any offense and any team. And Slade played really well while he was there. He obviously dropped out injured and wasn't available for the last game, but the balance it's set up with Ford, Farrell, Slade. It's a kicking axis. It's very much that. They passing to get to the wide channels, but like it's Slade's left foot, Farrell's right foot, and that's the thinking. Behind that centre pairing, they didn't trust Lawrence to be more of a like by like.
Even when he was on the pitch, they didn't trust him. They didn't trust him with the ball.
They didn't pass to him. He was only a dummy runner a lot of the time. So that like the balance is just not quite there. And generally, England at their very, very best have a guy in the midfield who will sit defences down by force and by running very, very hard, and they just hadn't had that, and as such they're a little more lateral, and it's just tougher to break teams down.
100%, yeah, they are finding it tough, and moving back rowers into that space is something they can consider. I do think personnel wise they do have some questions to answer, and that like Ford and Farrell's form is good at times but not great really, and certainly Farrell doesn't look the same man that he did look. And I definitely think they were helped in 2019 by just a phenomenal Saracens team that were playing. Like I thought of it at the time as rugby from the future. Like this is how it's going to look. The shape was like so. There were so many more moving parts than you'd see in any other offense. And so many more different options to choose from, and everyone had a distribution role. Everyone had a carry role in them. And so it was just overwhelming defenses. And then the bulk of that team went into England, and they refined that offense in certain ways. But they took a lot of what Saracens were doing.
They took the European champions and applied it, and they still have the European champions in Exeter, but it's a very different mould of team.
And they're not leaning into that, and they're leaning into more of the old guard. And then you have guys like Marcus Smith and obviously Sam Simmons and Joe Simmons, and a good few other players in the Premiership playing good rugby. You think of Don Brandt as well.
I still think of Ben Spencer at Bath.
Ben Spencer, absolutely.
And that former guy from that Sarries team. He was a guy who forced his way into that Sarries outfit, Ben Spencer, and took Wigglesworth's jersey just by force. And they were still using Wigglesworth had a lot left in the tank, but Ben Spencer took it, and even in that year he wasn't given the faith, and ultimately he was on the bench for the World Cup final, but wasn't used because he didn't trust him. So selection is still a problem. There's still
the
still an
depth
element
chart is
of
important for a World Cup building. The depth chart is important. They can't be in a situation where they're trying to run the same offense with the same guys and it's not working as well, and then all of a sudden you're not trusting someone else. It would have felt like the perfect tournament, especially after that opening day loss to Scotland, to change things up. And the fact that he didn't do that at all, Eddie Jones, and then he capped that off with the dreadful last day showing against Ireland, where they just get completely found out, and they basically are surprised by the fact that Ireland have game this time, and they don't adjust to that.
They don't respond to it well at all. No,
so it becomes a questionable showing in that regard. But I think it has to be reiterated that the gap between the top 5 teams is minimal.
And they're still a champion side, albeit the Autumn Nations Cup now. But
sure, how long
they can retain that forever now.
Scotland are 5 Nations champions.
Yes,
still,
that's true too. But they as you say, they were double champs going in, and now they're 5th, which speaks to just how tight it is. And by their own admission, they were a few degrees off in those key moments in those key games, and that's what's led them here. But it's not all doom and gloom. They still have guys like in Maro Itoje. They have like world class operators, world beaters in fact, who will just be like on World 15s, one of the first names on World 15s, and so they have a lot of calibre to choose from. And Jones has got just good acumen to point to. He has evidence. He has trophies in his cabinet that he can point to, and he has good showings.
He can point to the 2018 Six Nations, which went similarly in terms of poor performance.
Was similarly Tuolagilus as well. He was also out injured for that year, and they were also dual wielding the distributors, and they were also a bit lateral.
It's true. That's definitely true. But I mean, Eddie Jones can say, that happened in 2018. Didn't even have a great summer or autumn that year, but then we came back in 2019, made the relevant adjustments, and tore it up all the way, tore it up all the way to the World Cup final. Obviously they didn't quite win the Six Nations. Wales were brilliant that year as well, but they made it all the way to the World Cup final. They were in a sensational position, and I think just looking at the bits and bobs of that coaching ticket, there's no changing it this side of a World Cup. You still got John Mitchell is a fantastic coach. The defense is great still. And can improve as well, with match minutes for a lot of those guys who lead the defence. The forward pack in particular, like a lot of those Saracens guys were a little bit off the pace. That defence can get better again.
Sure.
So I don't think there's any case for pressing the panic button, and I think with the talent pool they've got and the coaching acumen that's in there, I don't think there's any cause for concern, and I think they're still every bit World Cup contenders and will be Six Nations contenders going forward.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Best try of the tournament then, what do you reckon? We have Johnny May's try. That was definitely a try. That was no issue with it. Where
the vault against Italy.
Vaulting over the tackle. It's not into a tackle, it's over the tackle. It's fine.
I mean...
we're not counting the Italy ones. There was Watson against Wales, which was an absolute peach.
I think that's my one. That was the one where they painted their best picture and Jamie George throws that lovely ball at the end of it. But it was just a lovely offensive sequence where they were very much going through their usual motions, picking the right holes, picking the right passes, getting all sorts of players into distribution roles, and then it ends very smartly with George putting a nice flat pass off the left hand in for Watson to score.
Yes, that's true. Lovely.
It's just quite a bit of the English picture in that, so I did like that score.
I think that's probably right. I guess Ben Youngs had a nice one against France, which was another version of that England offence rumbling through the multi-phase, and then a nice clever snipe from 9 to finish it off, but... I think I'd go for Watson's against Wales on pure aesthetic alone, just compared to the snipe. But a few nice tries, a few good glimpses as to what the team can be about, and just how dangerous they can be when they get the ball moving.
Exactly. Yeah, they have a lovely rhythm to their offense when it's going. Their moment of the tournament was probably Maro Itoje's game winner against France,
crashing through poor Woki.
That was listen, it was a game winning moment. It was they came up the end of what was possibly the game of the tournament still between England and France. It was such a crunchy game, and to go out and find a match winning play would have been a very satisfying thing for a team that's struggling. So I think that's their moment of the tournament.
I think so. I would go for that. Yeah. It certainly wasn't like full time at the end of the tournament or anything like that. No. Itoje crashing over in Le Crunch to seal that tie. Yeah, that's probably their best moment. And then player of the tournament. There were a fair few underperformed, but there were still some good performers. Itoje, again, always up a nominee. He was fantastic in that particular game. Curry, likewise. I thought they were the two busiest members of that pack throughout.
For sure.
Then the back line, you have guys like Young, Ford, Slade was brilliant when he was there briefly.
I wouldn't put Ford in there either. Like, I think he
undershot. He was very poor against
some
Ireland.
moments, some good and bad moments, but generally speaking, was himself and Farrell didn't work as well. Their kicking was poor, and they just didn't quite run a sharp an offense as they should. They didn't set up their kicks well. Everything they did was kind of telegraphed.
Yeah.
And I don't think they played particularly well. No. I thought the two wings were good.
Yeah, Watson and May still looked lethal. They were frozen out in the Scottish game and they were frustrated, but then when they started using it a bit more, they started appearing on the score sheets.
Watson was taking some tries. Watson outscored May this year.
He did. It's unusual. It's unusual, but May was still dangerous throughout, and they're still prolific enough in the air that they have quality out there. Daly as well had a bit of a mixed bag, to be honest, from Daly. He had some good and some very bad in brief patches, but I thought his second half showing against Ireland was very good, and they needed it. I thought he started that game with the kick out on the full, but then they were all starting in a dialed out fashion. But then in the second half, a few of their leaders did step up and make a bit more of a game of it, and he was one of them.
I don't think he's the player of the tournament.
No, I don't think he is either.
He did get dropped from Malins, who then got injured, which got him back in. He was kind of out of sorts from watching it.
But then so were a lot of them.
I think Curry's their guy.
I think Curry is. I was just leaning back to him. I think he was the one who was most efficient and most consistent. I think Itoje would be as well. They were both the two guys who were standing out in the pack making plays. But for that Itoje showing where he was on the wrong side of the whistle, and it was 5 penalties, and you can't really argue.
It was game losing.
Whereas Curry didn't lose any of the games really. He was part of what was good, even in their losses.
Yeah, even in Hamish Watson against Ireland kind of way, he was still out there making all kinds of plays, even in losing efforts. So Curry's stock has not fallen one bit.
No, I don't think so. I think he's a really good player. Yeah, I think that's England's player of the tournament is Tom Curry. Yeah, fantastic.
But I suppose overall it's a disappointing one. No cause for panic, but disappointment. They didn't win. They didn't come second. They didn't come third, fourth. They came fifth.
They did come fifth.
That is de facto
and they
last.
Also lost the Triple Crown for the first time in however many years.
Yes, the Triple Crown of L's. That's no good. So
all of those reasons not to be cheerful, but there is no reason to panic, I guess, because they're not that far off, and it's just that tight.
Exactly right. So that is.
Thank you very much for tuning into the Overlap Rugby podcast. If you're new here, please do like and subscribe and ring the bell as well so you'll be notified when we upload. But mainly drop a comment down below as well. We love hearing your thoughts on the rugby. Cheers.